The warm Sunday afternoon brightened the community center's worn walls as Maya Johnson hurried through its doors, her chore robes neatly folded in her arms. She was running late for the community outreach event, something that rarely happened to the usually punctual chore director. The parking lot had been fuller than expected, forcing her to park 3 blocks away. Maya, thank goodness you're here. Mrs. Patterson, the event coordinator, rushed toward her with worried eyes. The main performer called in sick. We need someone to lead the musical portion of today's program. Maya took a deep breath, trying to hide her surprise. She had only planned to attend as a guest today, hoping to enjoy the performances for once instead of leading them. But saying no to Mrs. Patterson was like saying no to her own grandmother. Impossible. Of course, I'll help. Maya smiled, her kind heart winning over her desire for a peaceful afternoon. As she walked toward the makeshift stage area, Maya noticed a man in a wheelchair sitting near the corner of the room. He seemed different from the other attendees, wearing a crisp blue button-down shirt and examining the sound equipment with careful eyes. Something about his focused expression caught her attention, but she quickly turned away when he looked in her direction. The event began with the usual announcements and speeches. Maya stood at the back, mentally preparing the songs she would lead. Just as she was about to step forward for her part, she heard a quiet voice behind her. "Excuse me," the man in the wheelchair had moved closer. "I couldn't help but overhear you're leading the music today. The microphone setup isn't ideal for group singing. Would you mind if I adjusted it?" Maya studied him carefully. His warm brown eyes held a wealth of knowledge, and despite being in a wheelchair, he carried himself with quiet confidence. "I'm James Richardson," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Former music producer before. Well, before this happened." He gestured to his wheelchair with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maya Johnson," she replied, shaking his hand. "You know about sound systems." James's eyes lit up. "Spent 15 years making sure every note sounded perfect in recording studios. This setup needs just a few tweaks to make your voice shine." For the next few minutes, James directed the volunteers on how to reposition the equipment. Maya watched in amazement as he explained complex sound concepts in simple terms, never losing patience when they didn't understand something. When it was finally time for Maya to sing, she couldn't believe the difference. Her voice filled the room perfectly, and the community members who usually chatted during performances fell silent, captivated by the clear sound. After leading 3 gospel songs, Maya noticed James watching intently from his corner. Unlike others who usually watched her face while she sang, his eyes were closed, fingers moving slightly as if conducting an invisible orchestra. During the refreshment break, Maya found herself walking toward him, carrying 2 cups of lemonade. "Your setup made all the difference," she said, offering him a cup. "I performed here many times, but it never sounded this good." James accepted the drink with a grateful nod. "Your voice did all the work. I just removed the barriers, letting everyone hear its true beauty." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "You have a gift, Maya. It's not just about the notes. You make people feel something when you sing." They spent the next hour talking about music, discovering their shared love for gospel and soul. James shared stories about famous recording sessions he produced, while Maya talked about her journey from church choir member to director. Neither of them noticed Mrs. Patterson watching them with a knowing smile, nor did they realize that the afternoon sun had started to set. Their conversation flowed naturally, as if they'd known each other for years instead of hours. As the event came to a close, Maya found herself reluctant to leave. There was something special about James, a depth beneath his friendly exterior that intrigued her. "Will you be at next week's community dinner?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "I wasn't planning to," James replied honestly, "but I think I just found a reason to come." As Maya walked to her car later that evening, she couldn't stop smiling. She had arrived at the community center expecting an ordinary Sunday afternoon, but left having met someone extraordinary. Sometimes, she thought, the best things in life happen when you least expect them. 2 months after their first meeting, Maya sat at her mother's kitchen table, watching her stir a pot of Sunday dinner with more force than necessary. The smell of collard greens filled the air, but today's usual peaceful afternoon was anything but calm. "Mama, please just give him a chance," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "James is different from anyone I've ever met." Patricia Johnson turned from the stove, wooden spoon in hand. "Baby, I'm just worried about you. Taking care of someone in a wheelchair isn't easy. Have you really thought about what that means? Maya wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, remembering how James had made her laugh just yesterday with his stories about old recording sessions. He doesn't need someone to take care of him, Mama. James is independent. His disability doesn't define who he is. Across town, James was having a similar conversation with his sister Rachel, who had driven 3 hours to visit him after hearing about Maya. James, I just don't want to see you get hurt, Rachel said, helping him organize sheet music in his home studio. Remember what happened with Karen? She said she could handle it too, but then she left. James wheeled himself to the window, looking out at the children playing in the neighbor's yard. Maya's different, he said quietly. She sees me, Rachel. Not the wheelchair, not the accident, just me. The next day, Maya and James met at their favorite coffee shop. They had started coming here after every choir practice, finding comfort in the quiet corner table that perfectly fit James's wheelchair. My mama wants to meet you, Maya said, stirring her cappuccino. She's invited us for Sunday dinner next week. James's hand paused over his coffee cup. Are you sure? From what you told me, she's not exactly thrilled about us dating. Maya reached across the table, taking his hand. That's exactly why she needs to meet you. Once she sees how amazing you are, she'll understand. The following Sunday, James arrived at Patricia Johnson's house 30 minutes early, a bouquet of fresh flowers in his lap. He had chosen his best shirt and even got a fresh haircut. As Maya helped him navigate his wheelchair up the house's front ramp, installed just last year for Maya's elderly aunt, his heart pounded. Patricia opened the door before they could ring the bell. Her eyes went straight to James, taking in every detail, but then something unexpected happened. James pulled out a small photo album from his bag. Mrs. Johnson, he said, his voice warm and respectful, Maya told me you used to sing backup for church chores in the 80s. I thought you might recognize some people in these photos from my producing days. Patricia's eyes widened as she flipped through the album. Is that Sister Mary Thompson? And Reverend Jackson's chore? A smile slowly spread across her face. You recorded their albums? For the next hour, James and Patricia sat looking through photos, sharing stories about gospel music's golden days. Maya watched in amazement as her mother's stern expression softened, replaced by genuine interest and eventual laughter at James's industry stories. During dinner, James insisted on helping set the table, showing Patricia how easily he managed with his wheelchair. When he complimented her cooking, telling her it reminded him of his late mother's Sunday dinners, Maya saw tears in her mama's eyes. As they were leaving that evening, Patricia pulled Maya aside. Baby, I was wrong, she whispered. That man loves you something fierce. I can see it in the way he looks at you. Later that week, James faced his own family gathering. Maya attended a dinner with his sister Rachel and her husband. Rachel watched carefully as Maya naturally included James in everything, never making a fuss about his wheelchair, but always subtly aware of his needs. When Maya excused herself to take a phone call from her chore member, Rachel turned to her brother. I get it now, she said softly. She's not pretending, is she? She really doesn't see the chair at all. James smiled, watching Maya through the window as she paced the porch, gesturing animatedly while talking about the upcoming choir performance. That's why I love her, he said, speaking the words aloud for the first time. She sees all of me, even the parts I thought were lost after the accident. As Maya walked back in, catching James's eye with a warm smile, both of them knew they had crossed an important bridge. Their family's acceptance meant more than just approval. It meant their love had proven strong enough to break down the first of many barriers they would face together. The evening air buzzed with excitement in the church hall as Maya's choir prepared for their weekly practice. James had started attending these sessions regularly, his presence becoming as natural as the hymn books on the pews. Tonight was special, though. They were preparing for the upcoming Easter celebration. All right, everyone, Maya called out, her voice carrying across the room. Let's try that last part again. Remember to hold the note longer on amazing and let it fade naturally. From his spot near the piano, James raised his hand. Maya, if I may suggest something? Maya nodded, always eager to hear his input. The tour members leaned forward, knowing that James' years of music production experience often led to magical improvements in their sound. Try having the sopranos drop their volume slightly when the altos come in, James suggested, wheeling himself closer to the group. "It'll create a beautiful layered effect, like waves in the ocean." They tried it his way, and the difference was immediate. The harmonies flowed together perfectly, creating a sound that gave everyone goosebumps. Several choir members wiped tears from their eyes when they finished. "That man knows his music," Mrs. Thompson, the eldest choir member, whispered to her neighbor. "He may be in that wheelchair, but his ears are touched by God himself." What nobody knew was that after each practice, James would stay behind, waiting until everyone left. On these quiet evenings, when he thought he was alone, he would wheel himself to the piano. His fingers, stiff from lack of use since the accident, would hover over the keys. One such night, Maya forgot her sheet music and returned to the church hall. She stopped at the doorway, heart catching in her throat as she watched James struggle to press a key. His face showed intense concentration, and after several attempts, a single, clear note rang out. Maya stayed hidden, not wanting to embarrass him. She watched as he tried again and again, managing to play 2 notes in succession. The joy on his face at this small victory brought tears to her eyes. The next day, James visited his physical therapist, Dr. Carter. "I want to focus on my hand mobility," he said with determination. "I need to play again." Dr. Carter looked thoughtful. "It won't be easy, James. The nerve damage from the accident was severe." "I don't need easy," James replied. "I just need possible." Meanwhile, unknown to Maya, James had started a secret project. During the hours she was teaching at the local music school, he would meet with various choir members individually. In his home studio, he had begun recording their voices, layering them together with the help of his old industry contacts. Sarah, one of the younger choir members, was particularly excited about the project. "It's going to be the most beautiful surprise ever," she said during one recording session. "Maya's going to cry when she hears this." As weeks passed, Maya noticed small changes in James. His hand seemed stronger when he held hers. Sometimes she caught him moving his fingers in rhythm with the music, more fluidly than before. But whenever she mentioned it, he would change the subject. One evening, after a particularly good practice session, Maya found James looking at an old photograph on his phone. It showed him standing at a grand piano, surrounded by famous gospel singers. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly, placing her hand on his shoulder. James looked up at her, his eyes full of something she couldn't quite read. "I used to think music was about creating perfect sounds," he said. "But being here, watching you lead the chore, I've learned it's about something more. It's about touching souls." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers more firmly than ever before. "You've taught me that music isn't just in the playing, it's in the heart. And my heart—" He paused, squeezing her hand gently. "My heart has never been more full of music than it is now." Maya bent down and kissed him softly, the evening light streaming through the church's stained glass windows casting colorful shadows around them. Neither of them spoke of the tears in their eyes, understanding that some moments are too precious for words. What Maya didn't know was that in James's home studio, a beautiful piece of music was slowly taking shape, a symphony of love that would change both their lives forever. The big spring concert was only an hour away, and Maya's choir members were bustling around the church getting ready. She stood in front of the mirror in the small office, adjusting her purple choir robe and taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. Something felt different about tonight, but she couldn't quite put her finger on why. "Maya?" Sarah, one of her youngest choir members, poked her head in. "James asked if you could come to the sanctuary for a minute. He says there's an issue with the microphones." Maya hurried to the main church area, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. The sanctuary was dimly lit, with only the stage lights on. As she approached the front, she noticed James wasn't in his usual spot by the sound equipment. Instead, he was next to the grand piano, his wheelchair positioned carefully beside the bench. The sight made Maya's heart skip. They always kept the piano closed during regular services, using it only for special occasions. "James, is everything okay with the sound system?" He smiled, his eyes twinkling with nervous excitement. "Actually, I may have told a small lie to get you here early." His hands were trembling slightly as he reached for something in his jacket pocket. "Before I do this," he continued, "there's something I need to show you first." Maya watched in confusion as James carefully moved from his wheelchair to the piano bench. a transfer he had clearly practiced many times. He positioned his hands over the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody was simple but beautiful, Amazing Grace, the first song they had worked on together with the tour. His fingers moved slowly but deliberately, each note clear and true. Maya's hands flew to her mouth, tears forming in her eyes as she realized what this meant. "I've been working with Dr. Carter for months," James explained, continuing to play softly. "The feeling started coming back in my fingers gradually. I wanted to wait until I could play at least one song perfectly before showing you." By now, chore members had begun quietly filing into the sanctuary, forming a semicircle around the piano. Mrs. Thompson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while others smiled knowingly. James finished the hymn and turned on the bench to face Maya. "When I had my accident 5 years ago, I thought my life in music was over. I lost hope, locked myself away, and stopped believing in miracles." He reached for her hand. "Then you walked into that community center, and everything changed. You showed me that music isn't just about playing instruments. It's about touching hearts and healing souls." Maya could barely see through her tears as James pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Sarah quickly stepped forward to help him keep his balance as he shifted to one knee, still holding Maya's hand. "Maya Johnson, you didn't just bring music back into my life, you brought life back into my music. You never saw my wheelchair as a barrier. You saw me for who I am, and you helped me see it too." He opened the box, revealing a delicate diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" The sanctuary fell completely silent. Maya looked around at her chore family, all wearing bright smiles, then back at James, the man who had brought so much joy and love into her life. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, the chore burst into song, the same arrangement of Amazing Grace that James had just played, but now with their voices lifting the melody to the rafters. Mrs. Thompson's powerful alto blended with Sarah's sweet soprano, creating the perfect backdrop to this perfect moment. James pulled Maya close for a kiss, and the tour's voices swelled even louder. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing then crying at the same time. "I have one more surprise," James said, wiping his eyes. "I've written a special piece for tonight's concert. The tour's been secretly rehearsing it for weeks." Maya looked at her chore members in shock, realizing they had all been in on this plan. They grinned back at her, looking pleased with themselves for keeping such a big secret. "I thought I knew all the songs for tonight's program," she said, still trying to process everything. James squeezed her hand. "Sometimes the best music comes from unexpected places, just like the best love stories." As the audience began filling the sanctuary for the concert, Maya couldn't stop looking at her ring, sparkling under the stage lights. She had come to the church tonight expecting to conduct a regular spring concert. Instead, she had received the most beautiful gift of all, a promise of a lifetime of love and music, with a man who had proven that with faith and determination, anything was possible. 3 months before the wedding, Maya sat in her living room surrounded by bridal magazines, color swatches, and guest lists. Her mother Patricia sat beside her, marking things off their planning checklist, while James was supposedly at another physical therapy session. "Baby, are you sure about having the ceremony at Crystal Gardens?" Patricia asked, looking at the venue brochure. "The ramps there are quite steep." Maya nodded confidently. "James and I visited twice. They're installing a new wheelchair lift next month, and the owner promised it would be ready before our wedding." What Maya didn't know was that James wasn't at physical therapy that afternoon. Instead, he was in his home studio with Sarah and 3 other chore members, working on something special. "Okay, let's try that harmony one more time," James said, adjusting some settings on his recording equipment. "Remember, this has to be perfect. It's going to be Maya's wedding surprise." Sarah smiled as she watched James work. His hands moved more smoothly over the controls now, thanks to months of therapy and practice. On his computer screen, dozens of audio tracks showed the progress of his secret project, a musical piece that told their love story. Meanwhile, Maya visited the local bakery to choose their wedding cake. The owner, Mrs. Chen, had prepared several samples for tasting. "This one," Maya said, pointing to a beautiful 3-tiered design. "But instead of regular stairs between the tiers, could you create a spiral pattern? Like a musical staff wrapping around the cake." Mrs. Chen's eyes lit up. Ah, to represent the music that brought you together. Yes, I can do that. That evening, Maya and James met with Reverend Thompson to discuss the ceremony. The kind-faced pastor had known Maya since she was a little girl singing in the children's choir. Now, Reverend Thompson said, looking at his notes, "You mentioned wanting to include both traditional gospel elements and modern music in the ceremony." James squeezed Maya's hand. "Yes, we wanted to represent both our backgrounds. Maya's gospel roots and my years in the music industry." What Maya didn't notice was the quick wink James gave Reverend Thompson, another person in on his growing secret. 2 months before the wedding, Maya's bridesmaids gathered at her house for dress fittings. Her best friend Tanya held up her phone, showing Maya different hairstyle options. "Girl, you need to decide soon," Tanya said. "The good hairstylists get booked months in advance." Just then, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from James. "Missing you. Working late at therapy again. Love you." She smiled, not knowing that James was actually meeting with a famous gospel singer he worked with years ago, recording the final vocal track for his special project. The weeks flew by in a blur of decisions and preparations. They chose flowers, white roses with purple orchids, picked linens, cream with gold accents, and selected the menu, a mix of soul food and James's family's Caribbean dishes. One afternoon, while trying on her wedding dress for final alterations, Maya overheard Sarah whispering to another chore member outside the fitting room. "Everything's ready for the big surprise. James finished the last recording yesterday." Maya's curiosity piqued, but before she could ask what they were talking about, the seamstress called her attention back to the dress hem. A week before the wedding, James watched Maya directing choir practice, her engagement ring catching the light as she moved her hands. His heart swelled with love, knowing that all his secret work would soon be worth it. "Earth to James," Maya called, waving her hand in front of his face. "Where did you go just now?" He smiled mysteriously. "Just thinking about our wedding. Can't believe it's almost here." That night, after Maya went home, James stayed late at the church with the choir. They rehearsed one final time, making sure every note of his surprise composition was perfect. "She's going to cry when she hears this," Mrs. Thompson said, wiping her own tears away. James looked at the sheet music in front of him, each note representing a moment in their journey together. "That's the plan," he said softly, "to show her through music exactly what she means to me." As the wedding day approached, both families came together to help with final preparations. Through it all, James kept his special project under wraps, knowing that when the moment finally came, it would be worth all the secrecy and late nights. For now, he simply smiled whenever Maya asked about his long therapy sessions, his heart full of love and anticipation for the musical surprise that would make their wedding day even more unforgettable. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows of the church's bridal room. Maya sat in front of the mirror as her mother gently placed the pearl-studded hair clips that her grandmother had worn at her own wedding. "You look like an angel, baby," Patricia whispered, her eyes misty with tears. She adjusted Maya's white dress, making sure it fell perfectly around her. The dress was simple but elegant, with delicate lace details and tiny musical notes embroidered along the hem, a special touch Maya had added to honor their shared love of music. Meanwhile, in another room, James was getting ready with his best man, his brother Marcus. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his purple bow tie, matching the color theme they had chosen. "Need help with that?" Marcus asked, stepping forward. James shook his head with a smile. "No, I've been practicing this too. Just like the piano." His fingers worked steadily, and soon the bow tie was perfect. The church filled quickly with guests from both families. On Maya's side, dozens of chore members arrived early, all wearing knowing smiles about the surprise to come. James' old music industry friends filled several rows, many having flown in from across the country to witness this special day. Mrs. Thompson peeked into the bridal room. "It's almost time, honey, and you won't believe how beautiful the sanctuary looks." She was right. The church had been transformed. White roses and purple orchids decorated every pew. Soft fabric draped from the ceiling created an intimate atmosphere, and the afternoon sun painted rainbow patterns through the stained glass windows. James waited at the altar in his wheelchair, which had been decorated with the same flowers as the church. He had polished it until it gleamed, wanting everything to be perfect for Maya. The music began, but not the traditional wedding march. Instead, the chore started singing a gospel arrangement of At Last, one of the first songs James and Maya had discussed during their early conversations about music. The doors opened, and Maya appeared on her father's arm. A collective gasp rose from the guests. She was radiant, her smile bright enough to light up the entire church. James felt tears forming in his eyes as he watched her walk down the aisle. When she reached him, Maya's father placed her hand in James's, whispering, "Take care of my baby girl." "With all my heart," James replied, his voice firm and clear. Reverend Thompson began the ceremony, speaking about love, faith, and the power of music to heal and unite. He talked about how Maya and James's story showed that true love knows no boundaries. "These two souls," he said, "found each other through music, and their love has created a symphony that touches everyone around them." When it came time for the vows, James surprised everyone by carefully moving from his wheelchair to stand, supported by Marcus, for just long enough to place the ring on Maya's finger. The months of physical therapy had made this moment possible, and tears flowed freely throughout the church. Maya's voice shook with emotion as she said her vows, promising to love James through all of life's songs, whether they be upbeat hymns or quiet ballads. James's vows spoke of how Maya had brought music back into his life in more ways than one. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Thompson finally announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." As their lips met, the choir burst into song, their voices rising in perfect harmony. The guests stood, applauding and cheering as the newlyweds turned to face them. At the reception, held in the beautifully decorated church hall, James and Maya's first dance surprised everyone. James had worked with his physical therapist to choreograph a special wheelchair dance, and Maya moved gracefully with him, their movements flowing together like a perfect duet. Mrs. Chen's cake was a masterpiece, with the musical staff spiraling around all three tiers, decorated with sugar flowers in their wedding colors. But what caught everyone's eye was the small piano made of fondant at the base, a tribute to the instrument that had played such an important role in their journey. As the evening went on, both families mingled and danced together, the earlier doubts and concerns long forgotten. Maya's chore members performed throughout the night, their songs filling the hall with joy. Looking at his new wife as she laughed with their guests, James smiled, knowing that this beautiful day was just the beginning. The biggest surprise, his special musical project, was still to come, but for now, he simply enjoyed watching Maya shine with happiness, her love making this day more perfect than he could have ever imagined. 3 months into their marriage, Maya and James had settled into a comfortable rhythm in their new home. They had chosen a modern one-story house with wide doorways and smooth wooden floors, perfect for James's wheelchair. Maya had turned one of the spare rooms into a music room, complete with a piano and recording equipment. One sunny morning, Maya woke up to the sound of music coming from that room. She found James at the piano, practicing a new piece. His fingers moved more confidently now, though he still needed to take frequent breaks. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, hearing her enter. "I made coffee. Well, I programmed the coffee maker last night," he added with a grin. Maya wrapped her arms around his shoulders from behind. "You're getting better every day. That new piece sounds wonderful." What she didn't notice was how quickly James closed the sheet music when she came closer. He was still working on his secret project, adding new elements that reflected their married life together. Their daily routine had its challenges, but they faced them together. Maya had learned to anticipate which situations might be difficult for James without being overprotective. James, in turn, had become more open about asking for help when he truly needed it. One evening, while they were preparing dinner together, James watched Maya reach for a high shelf. "You know," he said, "a year ago, I would have felt frustrated that I couldn't get that for you. Now I just appreciate how we've learned to work together." Maya smiled, remembering how far they'd come. "Remember when I tried to rearrange the whole kitchen on my first day here? And I kept telling you to leave everything where it was because I knew where everything was." James laughed. "We both learned to compromise." Their music careers were flourishing too. Maya's chore had been invited to perform at several major events, their reputation growing with each performance. James had started taking on small production projects again, working with up-and-coming gospel artists from their home studio. One Sunday after church, Mrs. Thompson pulled Maya aside. "Child, Marriage looks good on you. You're glowing. Maya blushed, looking across the room where James was working with some of the younger chore members on their harmonies. He makes me happy, Mrs. Thompson. Every day, even the hard ones. The hard days did come. There were times when James's physical therapy was particularly challenging, days when the pain from his old injuries flared up. But Maya had learned to read his moods, knowing when to offer support and when to give him space. On one such difficult day, James wheeled himself into the backyard, needing some time alone. Maya watched from the kitchen window as he sat there, his shoulders tense with frustration. After a while, she grabbed her portable keyboard and joined him. Without saying a word, she started playing their song, the one he had performed when he proposed. Slowly, she saw his tension melt away. By the time she finished playing, he had turned to face her, his eyes soft with love. "How do you always know exactly what I need?" he asked. Maya took his hand. "Same way you know what I need. Love makes us pay attention." Their families visited often. Patricia would come over with new recipes, having learned all of James's favorite dishes. James's sister Rachel brought her kids, who loved playing music with their Uncle James and Aunt Maya. One evening, while they were hosting a small dinner party for their chore family, Sarah accidentally mentioned something about the project. James quickly changed the subject, but Maya's curiosity was growing stronger. "You're up to something," she said later that night as they got ready for bed. "All these secret meetings and mysterious phone calls." James just smiled mysteriously. "Good things come to those who wait, Mrs. Richardson." The name still gave Maya butterflies. She watched as James transferred himself from his wheelchair to their bed, marveling at how his upper body strength had increased. His physical therapy was showing remarkable results, though he kept pushing himself to achieve even more. "I have news," Maya said, sitting beside him. "The tour's been invited to perform at the National Gospel Music Convention. It's in 3 months. James's eyes lit up with an excitement that seemed bigger than the moment called for. "That's perfect timing," he whispered, almost to himself. "Perfect timing for what?" Maya asked. But James just pulled her close for a kiss. "You'll see," he said. "Everything is coming together exactly as it should." As they fell asleep that night, Maya listened to James humming softly, a tune she didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar. Little did she know that soon, very soon, she would understand everything. The National Gospel Music Convention Center buzzed with excitement. Maya stood backstage with her chore, making last-minute adjustments to their robes. This was supposed to be her final performance with them before moving to Atlanta, where James had been offered a major music production opportunity. "Has anyone seen James?" Maya asked, looking around. "He said he'd be here early to check the sound system." Sarah and Mrs. Thompson exchanged knowing looks. "Don't worry about James," Mrs. Thompson said, patting Maya's hand. "Everything is exactly as it should be." The huge auditorium was packed with over 3,000 people. Maya peeked through the curtain, her heart racing. She saw her mother Patricia sitting in the front row, dabbing her eyes already, even though the performance hadn't started. Reverend Thompson stepped onto the stage to introduce them. "Tonight's final performance holds a very special surprise," he announced, his voice warm with emotion. "Sometimes, love creates the most beautiful music of all." Maya's chore took their places on stage. As she raised her hands to begin conducting, she noticed something strange. Instead of their planned opening song, the chore started singing a melody she had never heard before, yet somehow it felt familiar. Then, from the side of the stage, came the sound of a piano. Maya turned to see James wheeling himself toward a grand piano that hadn't been there during their rehearsal. But what happened next made her gasp. With steady movements, James stood up from his wheelchair. The audience fell completely silent. Using a cane for support, he took several steps toward the piano bench. Months of secret physical therapy, beyond his regular sessions, had made this moment possible. As he sat at the piano, his fingers found the keys, and he began to play. The melody matched what the chore was singing, a beautiful new composition. Maya realized this was what he had been working on all these months. James spoke into a microphone attached to the piano. "Maya, my love, this song is called Our Symphony. Every note tells a part of our story." The music swelled as James played, his fingers moving confidently across the keys. The chore's voices wove through the melody, singing lyrics that told their journey, from their first meeting at the community center to their wedding day and beyond. Tears streamed down Maya's face as she recognized different musical themes. The gospel songs from their first choir practice together, the tune he had played when he proposed, their wedding song, all masterfully woven into this new composition. But James wasn't finished surprising her. As the music reached its peak, a video screen lowered behind the tour. On it played a beautiful montage, pictures and videos from their journey together, messages from their families and friends, moments from choir practices, all set to the music James had composed. The audience watched in awe as James continued playing, his body swaying with the music. This was more than just a performance. It was a testament to the power of love, determination, and faith. As the song reached its final verses, James stood again, steady on his feet. The months of intense physical therapy had strengthened him more than anyone knew. He walked the few steps to where Maya stood, still crying happy tears. "You taught me that disability doesn't define me," he said, his voice carrying through the microphone. "Your love gave me the strength to push beyond what I thought was possible." The choir's voices softened to a gentle harmony as James took both of Maya's hands in his. "This isn't our final performance," he announced. "I turned down the Atlanta offer. Instead, I bought the old recording studio downtown. We're staying right here where our story began." Maya couldn't speak through her tears of joy. The audience erupted in applause and cheers. In the front row, Patricia and James's sister Rachel hugged each other, both crying. "Our symphony isn't ending," James said, pulling Maya close. "It's just beginning." The choir launched into the song's finale, their voices rising to the rafters. James and Maya stood together center stage, their love story displayed on the screen behind them, their families beaming from the audience, and their future bright with promise. As the last notes faded away, the applause was deafening. But Maya and James barely heard it. They were lost in their own moment, their foreheads touching, their hearts beating in perfect harmony. Their love story had proved that with faith, determination, and the healing power of music, any obstacle could be overcome. It wasn't just about a black woman marrying a disabled man. It was about two souls finding each other, healing each other, and creating something beautiful together. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 10 minutes, but for Maya and James, time had stopped. In that moment,